Everyone, hey, I'm back in the video lecture, and today we're going to discuss the wrist movements that are basically flexion, extension, radial, and ulnar deviation, also known as palmar flexion, dorsiflexion, abduction, and adduction. Okay, these names are written here. Okay, starting from the wrist flexion. Okay, before going in towards depth of this, we can just see how these movements are performed. Okay, the flexion is performed in the forward direction. Okay, the palm side of the your hand. The extension is performed on the back side of your hand. Okay, starting from this neutral position, and you can just go backwards. Starting from this neutral position, and you can go forward. Okay, flexion extension is performed in this way. Ulnar and radial deviation is performed in a way the where the bones are present. Okay, ulnar is present on the little finger side, so the ulnar deviation is performed in this way. Okay, in this direction, slightly deviated. You can just deviate your wrist or arm or hand in the little finger side. And for the ulnar radial deviation, you can just deviate your wrist on the thumb side. Okay, simple as that. So this is how these movements are performed. So now we have to see how these movements are performed in a passive range of motion, right? So in the passive range of motion, as you can see in the picture, the patient is in spine. One from a therapist support the elbow joint from one hand, and the other hand is basically used to perform the movement. Okay, so because why do you think therapists grasp the wrist and not the fingers to perform the complete movement? There is a major concept that is present in this movement, and you have to understand that so you can perform these movements in a very easy way. Okay, so this concept is basically called as the extrinsic muscles or the range of extrinsic muscles. So because if you can just hold the fingers, it basically affects the because of the extrinsic muscles of the wrist or hand or fingers, it affects the range of wrist. Okay, range of wrist if it because when the tension is produced on the wrist joint or on the, for example, I can just give you an example. You can just hold the whole hand. Okay, what happens? You can restrict the wrist joint movement. Okay, but if you can just hold the wrist and not the fingers, then the tension is very low and you can just easily perform the range of motion, flexion, extension, ulnar and radial deviation. You can just perform on yourself or your, on any of one of your friend or anyone in your family. You can just perform or see what is the why we have to perform this in this way instead of holding the whole arm with the with fingers as well. Okay, combining with the fingers. So basically, what we have to do is basically because to reduce the effect of tension in the wrist joint, we can just leave the fingers in a freely way, so their fingers can move freely as they want when you are performing the flexion and extension, radial and deviation on the restaurant. Okay, so this is how, as we have discussed, the if we can just perform the forward movement, the flexion is performed. If you perform the backward movement, you can perform what, the extension. Okay, the therapist hold this your elbow joint or the patient's elbow joint, and forearm is in the almost 90 degree, and you can just perform movement in this way as well as an extension. But this is the most probably and gold standard way to perform these movements. Okay, but it can depend, and you can modify according to the patient's requirement, according to patient's tolerance, and etc. So these are just the standard. You can just modify according to patient as well movements, but you have to understand that you have to perform flexion, extension, radial, ulnar deviation. So you need to make that kind of position. So that is so you can perform all of the rest motions on that joint. Okay, so thanks for watching. If you have any query, you can ask. And in the next lecture, we're going to discuss the hand cupping and flattening the arch of the hand at the carpometacarpal and intermetacarpal joint. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.